Chapter 23. The first light of January 2nd crept across the floorboards of Gear House like a pale, intrusive finger. The room smelled of damp, and the sharp, medicinal sting of the alcohol Paddy had used to scrub the world away. Josephine's eyelashes flickered. The transition from the dark, cold vacuum of her dreams to the heavy reality of the bed was agonizing. Every breath felt like a serrated blade drawing across her abdomen. Bill Sterling was still there. He hadn't moved from the armchair by the hearth. His sleeves still rolled up, a dark bruise growing in the crook of his elbow where the transfusion needle had bit deep. He looked older, the lines of his face carved by the flickering shadows of the dying fire. Josephine tried sitting up, a sharp gasp escaping her cracked lips. "Don't," Bill said, his voice a low command that brooked no argument. He was across the room in 2 strides, his large hands pressing gently but firmly against her shoulders. "Paddy sewed you back together with parachute silk, Joe. If you break those stitches, even he can't save you a second time." Josephine looked at him, her eyes clouded with the remnants of shock. She looked down at the heavy layers of wool and the ghost-white bandage peeking from the top of a new night dress. "The cramp," she whispered, her voice a mere rasp. "The ice. Bill, I felt ice inside me." She reached her hand toward her stomach, her fingers trembling. The flatness she encountered there, the hollow, aching void where a dull, pulsing heat had been just hours before, told her everything the silence in the room wouldn't. "It's gone," she said. "It wasn't a question. I was a broken bar. I had a—" Bill didn't flinch. He sat on the edge of the mattress, the weight of him tilting her world toward him. "It's gone," he agreed. "I buried him myself in the chapel." "You lost a great deal of blood. If it weren't for Paddy's madness and a few pints of my own Sterling special, you'd be on a cooling board in the village by now." Josephine closed her eyes, a single tear tracking through the grime and pallor of her cheek. She didn't cry for the child, for she hadn't known it long enough to name it. Instead, she cried for the violation of it, for her own self, at never being able to resist a challenge. For the fact that David's last lesson had nearly resulted in her death. "He doesn't know," she murmured. "No," Bill said, his jaw tightening. "And he won't. Not until the war is over. Not until you decide he's earned the right to know what he nearly cost this family." He reached for a glass of water on the nightstand, propping her head up with a tenderness that felt alien coming from a man who built armies. "You have 3 weeks," Bill continued, shifting back into the cold pragmatism of the SAS command. 3 weeks to it. "I've told the household it's a recurring bout of the malarial fever you picked up in the field. Henry is monitoring the penicillin. If you so much as put a foot on the carpet before Paddy says so, I'll have a guard posted at your door." Josephine swallowed the water, the coolness hitting her throat like a benediction. She looked at Bill, really looked at him, seeing the ghost of her own blood now running through his veins, and his through hers. "The mission," she whispered. "Cold it's the jump. If you can stand, you go," Bill promised, though his heart rebelled against the words. "But you go as a soldier, Josephine, not a martyr." "I won't lose my best operative, or my own blood," he grinned at the poor joke, "to a Saxon fortress because you were too proud to heal." He stood up, adjusting the blanket around her chin. For a moment, his hand lingered near her temple, a silent acknowledgement of the scars he had seen, the secrets he now kept, and the forbidden spark that had ignited in the carnage of the night. "Sleep," he commanded. "The ghost army is marching in the south. You need to be ready to join the real one in the north." As he walked toward the door, Josephine called out, her voice barely audible over the highland wind. "Bill." He paused, his hand on the heavy brass knob. "Thank you for the fuel." Bill didn't turn around. He simply nodded, the weight of the secret pressing into his shoulders as he stepped out into the hallway, leaving her to the silence and the slow, rhythmic healing of her broken body. 88,888,888. By the 3rd week of January, the boredom was a secondary infection. The incision was healing, a thin, angry violet line that pulled sharply whenever Josephine tried to sit up too fast. Paddy had been true to his word. He had practically picketed her door, and Bill Sterling had reinforced the order with a quiet, watchful authority. By the 21st day, she was pacing the room like a caged leopard. Bill Sterling entered, carrying a stack of heavy wooden crates. He found her standing by the window, her face finally regaining a hint of its former bronze, though she still moved with a slight, protective hitch. "You look like you're about to jump out that window, Joe," Bill remarked, setting the crates down. "I might," she snapped. "Since we aren't allowed to jump into Saxony, I'm rotting here." Bill saw the way she instinctively pressed her hand to her lower waist, the pull of the silk stitches. He also felt that same, dangerous stir of admiration and forbidden desire he'd felt on the night of the surgery. Seeing her recover was intoxicating, a lethal blend of professional respect and a hunger he knew he had to bury. He could still feel the phantom sensation of the needle in his arm, the literal connection of his blood flowing into her veins. It made her feel like a part of him, a secret he owned. Alistair Claassen said he had never seen the like, and that Paddy's, and Bill's, swift action had certainly saved Josephine's life. He pushed the crates toward her. "Red Cross parcels for the off-lags. If Cairo won't let us fly, we send the war in a box. They need searching and repacking. Special items, compass buttons, silk maps in the linings, hacksaws in the chocolate ins." Josephine looked at the boxes with disdain. "You're giving me knitting, Bill." "I'm giving you David's lifeline," Bill countered. "Pack them so even a Gestapo inspector wouldn't find the needle. If we have to wait for the big one to use our initiative, let's make sure David has the tools to meet us halfway." Josephine's fingers reached out, touching the rough wood. It wasn't a parachute jump, but it was a way to reach into the stone walls of Colditz. "Get me some fine wire and the soldering iron," she said, her voice dropping to the edge of frustration. "And Bill, tell Paddy I'm staying in the chair for now." While Paddy prepared for the carnage of the front lines, Josephine continued her masquerade among the crates. The busyness Bill had prescribed had become her greatest weapon. She worked under the flickering lights of the great hall, packing the standard 1944 Red Cross manifests, powdered milk, spam, tea, and chocolate. But beneath the vegetable soup concentrate, Josephine and Henry Druce were stowing the gear for their own private war. They were the ghosts of the Vosges, and they were tired of waiting for the High Command to remember the 31 men lost in the Nacht Nebel. "Bill thinks he's sending me to London to coordinate with the ICRC," Josephine whispered to Henry as they loaded a final crate. "He thinks he's kept me safe from Paddy's frontline madness." "Let him think it," Henry replied, his eyes hard. "By the time he realizes the truck never reached the London depot, we'll be over the channel." Josephine's fingers were steady as she resealed a tobacco tin, but the rest of her felt like a fraying rope. The soldering iron hissed on the stand, a plume of acrid smoke curling toward the ceiling. She didn't hear the door open, she only felt the sudden shift in the room's pressure as Paddy stepped inside. He didn't look at the Red Cross parcels. He looked at her, at the way she sat slightly lopsided to favor her left side, and the way her hand hovered near the hidden, livid scar beneath her woolen trousers. "You're packing for him," Paddy said, his voice a low, gravelly vibration. "Even now, after the blood on the floorboards, you're still reaching for that castle." "I made a promise to Bill," she replied, her voice sharpening. "I'm the one getting him out, Paddy. I don't care if Cairo has vetoed the jump. I will find a way." Paddy walked to the table, his massive shadow falling over the boxes. "We need to have the talk, Joe. The one I've been putting off while I waited for you to be able to stand." Josephine went still. "There's nothing to talk about. The fever is gone, and the stitches are holding." "Don't play the soldier with me," Paddy growled. "I saw what came out of you. 12, maybe 14 weeks. You were carrying a life while you were throwing yourself up mountains. And the father?" He took 2 angry steps towards her. "I've seen the way Bill looks at you, all guilty and hungry. And I've seen the way Henry watches your shadow." At this, Josephine turned her head sharply and stared at her brother. "Don't you dare!" she snapped, her eyes flashing. "Henry Druce is my brother-in-arms, and Bill is our commander. I will not have you tarnish that because you've spent too much time with liquid potatoes." Paddy leaned in, his blue eyes boring into her. Fine. It's not Henry. It's not even the Sterling who's currently pacing the floorboards below. That only leaves the one in the cage. It was David. Wasn't it? Josephine looked at the Silver Hawk fragment, her bravado flickering. It was David. It was always David, even when he was breaking me in the training drills. He was the only one who didn't look at me like a lady or a sister. He looked at me like a weapon, and I loved him for it. Paddy closed his eyes for a second. The confirmation was a physical blow. He told me when the German resistance and I finally broke them out, just as the gallows were being tested. He bragged about it, said he'd managed it twice before the guards caught him again. He didn't even know you'd been trying to reach him for months. Too busy being the great David Sterling. He never listens, Josephine whispered. And then he got himself recaptured. After everything we risked. He doesn't know what he left behind, Joey. He doesn't know about the transfusion, or the child, or the fact that Bill's blood is the only reason you're breathing. Josephine looked at the Silver Hawk. He can't know. If he knows, he'll stay in that cell out of some misplaced sense of penance. I need him sharp. I need him arrogant. I need him to want to escape for himself, not for a ghost. Paddy looked at the pale, lethal woman sitting before him. He reached out and placed a heavy, rough hand on her shoulder. I'm going to pull him out of that hole again, Joey. But when I do, I'm going to tell him exactly what he owes. Not to the king. To you. No. Josephine leaned into his touch, a single, jagged sob finally breaking through her ribs. Just bring him back, Paddy, she whispered, her voice cracking. Bring him back so I can hate him for it. But as Paddy's heavy boots thudded away down the stone corridor, the sound echoing like a heartbeat, the grief in her eyes began to crystallize into something sharper, something lethal. She looked down at her arm, where Bill's blood had entered her bloodstream. It had all ended like this because he wouldn't try and escape. Because of Eve. It had to be. He was waiting for her. Why? No, she thought, the fire in her gut finally burning through the grey fog of the past few weeks. I am not waiting for Paddy to settle my debts. I am not waiting for a man who considers me a sister to do what I was trained to do. She thought of Bill, the man who had sat by her bed while his own life force dripped into her veins to keep her from the grave. He had saved her when David's legacy had nearly hollowed her out. He had given her his blood, his silence, and his protection. She owed the master of this house a debt that couldn't be paid with gratitude. It could only be paid in kind. And she had to be the one to face David Sterling and challenge him on his own inaction. It was unthinkable that the founder of the SAS would be in cahoots with Eve Mansour, spy, traitor to the Allies, murderer of the 31 through the Funkspiel operation that compromised their radio transmissions. Yet, Josephine had thought it, because it was the only conclusion that explained the facts. I am the one getting him out, she affirmed to herself, her fingers tightening, until her own nails bit into her skin. I gave my word to Bill. I will be the one to hand him his brother, and then I will be done with the Sterlings forever. The next morning, Josephine didn't wait for permission. She found Bill in the study and informed him of her new directive. Under the guise of women's work, she became the shadow master of the Red Cross supply line. She spent the following weeks in a blur of calculated motion coordinating with the WVS and local committees, her clipboard acting as a shield. She tracked every crate and manifest, ensuring the special parcels, the ones with the wire, the maps, and the hacksaws, were routed specifically toward the Saxon fortresses. It wasn't just tea that was being shipped, either. Josephine was mapping the Reich's interior. By learning which transit hubs were vulnerable, which German sensors were predictable, and exactly how to slip through the cracks of the Nacht und Nebel, her progress on the ground would be easier, and she would more easily blend in. And she got outdoors, accompanying the men of the SO and the SAS as they continued with their training, every lungful of air, tinged with the promise of spring, inching her way to better health. With every mile covered in the back of a bouncing Bedford truck, her strength returned. The sharp pull of the silk stitches in her abdomen, due to be removed by the doctor, softened into a dull, manageable ache. Her skin bronzed again under the biting Highland sun, and she felt life creeping slowly back into her body. By the time February turned to March, the woman who had bled out on the floorboards was gone. In her place was a weapon being recalibrated for a single, surgical strike. She was no longer a victim of the Sterling legacy, she was its architect. "Let them think I'm just a lady with a clipboard," she murmured to Henry Druce one afternoon as they watched a shipment of next of kin parcels being loaded for the continent. "It's much easier to dismantle a fortress when they think you're only there to bring the tea." Henry took her hand for a moment and then squeezed it. Josephine looked toward the south, towards the border. Channel-wise, France-orientated, and could feel Bill's blood in her veins, strong, stubborn, and focused. She had a promise to keep, and she was going to be the one to fulfill it.